Great. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to jump into an example, a working example of how data pumps work today. All right. So the list that I have here in the agenda is, let's make this bigger. We're going to start with the model. So you can kind of see how here this corresponds to this list. So first we're going to go looking at a model. I broke my thing. And then, so this model is here. So this is our Dbt documentation. Dbt is a tool that we use to do all of our modeling. We also can use it for our docs. So here is the Dbt docs for the pump marketing contact model, which is the model that we're using to pump data from Snowflake to Marketo. You can see we have the column names here, what the data type is. And then the way that we've been using the docs for this is that we use this description field to just tell you what field we're mapping to, right? So this way, the integrations team that Daniel's on, they have a point of, they can look at this for a reference when they're building out those fields and those mappings. If we're working with someone like Jack or Jim on the system side or the technical owner side, they can have a source to see what we're building and how we're imagining it mapping. They can help us contribute to this mapping here. We sort of have a documented version control. This exists in the YAML file also in our public repository for the data team, which we can point to later if you guys are interested. But yeah, this is the model, let's say. And this is, if you go into Snowflake, you can query pump marketing contact. And this is the SQL that generates it, etc. You can even, if you really cared to see how our warehouse worked, you can see a lineage graph of where the data comes from. So we're trying to leverage and resurface as much of what we already have in place as possible. So this is the model. Then the next step is in pumps.yaml. We have this pump marketing contact model at this model record. And then we have some attributes. We have a timestamp column. This is the column that the pump framework will use to increment the data. So I want to query since the last time I got data to now and get everything that's changed. We're going to use for this model the last changed column. If there's not an incrementing timestamp column, meaning we always want to get all the data every time we query, we would just put a null here and data pump will handle that. If the data is sensitive, in this case it is, and I think in many of the cases where we're going to CRM, we'll probably have some sensitive data as well. We're going to mark that as true. And what that means is that this will look at the sensitive schema. So in the process here, we'll go through this more detail in a second. The first step is to create a data model. Once that's done, or during that process, we'll evaluate what the data is like. If there's sensitive data, part of that model creation process, we make sure that that goes to the right place in the warehouse, right? So if it has personal information in it, we have to be careful about where it goes. We have a dedicated schema in our warehouse for that sensitive data. It'll go there, and then this just tells the data pump that's where it is. This owner field is not handled at all by the data pump framework, by what's happening in the orchestration. It's just for documentation in this record. So if something goes wrong, we want to know who to reach out to. It's in the same place as this other information, so it kind of keeps it all together. That's that. Any questions about pumps.yaml? Once it's in pumps.yaml, then it'll be available in the Airflow DAG. So this is what Airflow looks like. Each of these squares is a task instance. So this is a time that it runs. You can see that we've been running this pump marketing contact. This pump hash marketing contact is a hash de-identified version for testing for some time. Just last week, Michael Walker on the data engineering team added a product usage pump. This could be what we use for Salesforce, by the way. I think this is the data that we're actually interested in. He went ahead and plugged it in, so we can start using that to test if we'd like. Once it's in this is going to be running. We can look at a log here, and it's going to go ahead and, it's going to do, I don't know if it's really obvious here what it's doing. Maybe not. Oh, it's right here. So it says copy into raw.public.s3 data pump / and then you get now we're getting into S3 stuff here. Then it truncates it, so you can't actually see it. Oh, let's jump into S3 and then we'll see it. So
let's assume it queries everything and uploads everything. Just a joke. It's a joke.
Yeah, just assume. I guess I could make the log verbose, but I don't think we benefit much from that. So here's the S3 bucket where it's landing, right? So here's, this one's actually from previous testing. So this isn't getting anything. Actually, this might still be getting stuff. I have another task running in the background from testing that does this. We have the marketing contact, and then we have this new one that Michael just added, pump subscription product usage, and it's just going to spit out CSVs. If you're curious, the name here is the query ID from Snowflake. And it'd be fairly easy for us to add anything to the object naming here. So one of the things we'll talk about at the end is we need to add some testing, development, and monitoring to this as well. Part of the development that we'll probably add is we'll probably have a separate object name in S3 for when we're in a testing or development phase, right? So these are some things we haven't added yet, but we will, and it's really easy to add, right? So let's say we wanted to add the target to the object name in S3. So we wanted it to be, let's say pump subscription product usage is relevant to a bunch of places, which it might be, and we maybe want to like split that out into separate files for some reason. Maybe we don't, but maybe we could quickly add just like a, hey, maybe we add a target variable to the pump.yaml, and then we can just feed that into the way that this name is constructed. So it's all happening via Python. It's pretty straightforward to make those changes. Now, after that point, like I said, Workato can read S3. It's got permission. I just have a link here to all of the integrations that are currently supported by Workato. Anyone who's ever used a tool like Workato before, whether it's MuleSoft or Workato or what's the other one, Informatica, Zapier, knows that like not all of these are created equal, right? So there's still always, even if something's in this list, it doesn't necessarily mean that we could do it the way that we'd hope, but this is just a list of the thing there. Daniel Parker's on the call. He's the technical owner for Workato at the moment. Thanks for joining, Daniel. We can ask if you guys have questions about Workato. We can jump into that now, or if you kind of get it, we can keep going.
Well, I have a whole slew of questions about the CSV output into the S3 bucket, but that's kind of, well, hold on. Daniel might be able to actually answer something by showing off. Daniel, how are you ingesting those CSVs as the format and the timing? It wasn't like one per day, or that's what it looked like. How are you ingesting those into Workato and doing anything with them? If you want to show it off, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, so I can share my screen if you like.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up too, do you have something ready, or do you want me to like?
You can go first. You're already sharing, so you can go first, and then we'll jump to mine.
Yeah, so the way that Workato works, last time I set something like this up, and I imagine this hasn't changed, is Workato basically lists the objects in the bucket at some interval. I think it's like 5 minutes or something. And then if it notices a change, so it notices a new object, then it will go run the, I guess it's the download to get the read. And then it'll use that, batch it that way.
Right. So
yeah,
while Dana's gone, maybe I can ask, because I'll just drill in, we're right here. So currently, the way we're doing it, again, is a snapshot model, which is we have the complete data set, we're snapping it once a week, just arbitrary amount of time. It's what made sense. Again, it's a manual process. So when this runs, Justin, before you said that it's actually an appending process, meaning when we clicked in these CSVs, is that a portion of the data set? Is that a snapshot of the data set? Or is that a running list? You could do either. Okay.
That would be determined by two things: the model that's created, right? Mm-hmm. So what's in that model, for example, because you can have them. We could have a model that replicates data. So every time you've got a timestamp, and this is all of the data for yesterday, then you could have rows in that same table for that same data, but what it was yesterday. So that could be one way. The other way is it could just be the current state of the table, and then what we would do, let me see if I still have it up. And pumps.yaml here, again, we have this timestamp column. So if you give a null value here, then our pumps job or our pumps framework will just say, well, there's not one, so I'm just going to query the whole thing. And I can show you really quick what that looks like. It's just in this module.
What is it? And well, actually, never mind. Keep going. I'm interested.
Yeah. So basically, all this is doing here is it's generating a copy command, which is the command you'd run to Snowflake. And if it doesn't have this timestamp column, then where is it? Right here. If timestamp equals none, then it's just select star from the table, right? If it does have a timestamp, then it will add the where clause, which would have the time frame that it's querying.
Got it. So that appending delta, you're actually piggybacking on top of stock Snowflake functionality. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, Snowflake's just you're just using SQL on it, right? So we can do whatever we want with it. Anything that SQL can do is what we can do here. And we've set this up in Python in a way that, again, if you pass it a timestamp to increment on, it'll use it. And if you pass it a null, it'll just take the whole table every time.
For sure. So you're doing off of timestamps based on the Snowflake data itself. Snowflake doesn't have any type of like point in time compare function.
It would be based off the model.
Yeah. Okay. You're doing it yourself. This is me not knowing. I thought, oh, maybe Snowflake has something cool built in.
So just imagine Snowflake is a database like any other database, like MySQL, and you can have arbitrary whatever in it, right? Whether it's good or bad. So we, because that's arbitrary is the reason why in pumps.yaml, we make you tell us what the name of the timestamp column is, because you could name it, Gerald. And like maybe Gerald is the column that you have, the last time that data is changed, or when you want to pull it is actually what it really means. When you want to send it in the pump, you just tell us the name of that column. And as long as it's a date or timestamp field, it'll work.
Yeah. And you have the ability to say, listen, we'd like a full snap of the data at an interval. And the only thing that S3 kind of fails at is the only clue we have to say, like, this data, this snap is for this date, is like hiding it in the title. Right. I know you can this append metadata to anything they get to the files dumped into S3, or do we have to rely on the title?
It depends on what you mean by metadata. I mean, there's a few things in what you're asking, and maybe we could do this in a separate conversation because it could take a while to get through this. But basically what's happening is the way that we can tell what we're sending when would be a combination of, is it incrementing on a timestamp? And if it is, then the way that it's working is Airflow is actually passing in a token or a variable it's a Jinja template to generate that query. And so we can tell by this run, I can't mouse over.
Other side, I believe that these things know when they ran. What I'm saying is that the data outputted into S3, let's say that was the product usage run for today. How would I know
that? So if it was using a timestamp column, like incrementing, and like the one that we showed, then the data
it would always be the most recent one. I'm saying if it was a snapshot style.
So if it was the entire table?
That's correct.
Then it would be whatever, it would be based on the time it ran. So is the question, how do we know what the data, like when it was run? Or is the question, how do we know what the data looked like when it was run? Or something else?
How we say that this is now it's a two-parter. Let's say it's a single table. The goal is just to get that table into a CSV where someone can consume it up on S3. Right. Awesome. We just need to know metadata about what this is, such as, is it complete? When did it fire? The rows, even though obviously we get that in about 2 seconds reading it. But is there a better way, to your knowledge, to attach that metadata, or do we have to literally smuggle it into the CSV title?
I don't think we would want to. I mean, if we wanted, you have metadata in S3 about when the object was created. That might be sufficient for what you mean.
I'm almost positive, and again, we're using it as the real example of us firing off an Apex job that can go up to S3 and talk. I would hope we are able to get at the metadata. That's why I asked. I would much rather have it here than like parse a CSV title. That's Sadly, in the past, I've resorted to the former. We can't, no, thank you. Can your code that pumps into S3 set this metadata?
I wouldn't want it to, right? In my opinion, we want to be as agnostic as possible to what we're doing here. So if the question is, when was the data dropped or copied or updated? Right. I'm going to rely on.
We're going to go off when it arrived, and that's okay. That's okay, and we can roll with that. It's like our data as of this date. It's a fact. Awesome. Bringing me to my next question. You mentioned this very quickly. For data that might be dependent upon even intervals, right? Mm-hmm. If there was a problem, or if there was something where people are expecting it to come in on a certain day, and it's not all the time, it's not always, right? What would we, what is there any type of retries, failure monitoring? How could we go and say, oh man, well, something went really wrong. We need to go and rerun it as if it was yesterday.
So there are two ways, and Daniel can talk. There's two parts of this, and I can talk to one part, and Daniel can talk to the other part. The ideal way, the way that we want to do this, is we want to keep Workato and S3 as agnostic staging intermediaries and mappings. Mm-hmm. Within Airflow, I can, what would happen is if there was a failure in Airflow, this would be red, and we would get an error that would pump out to our monitoring. It would show up for us in Slack. It would be up to whatever data engineer was triaging that day. They might end up assigning it to me at this point, since this is new, to go and resolve it and fix it. And then it's really easy for us to rerun these jobs, whether that be through this interface, or I can also exec into the container this is running on, and I can run a command that can get me like a window of like run all of the tasks between these timeframes. That would be the ideal way. Now, there's a possibility, this is very new, so we're not sure exactly how it's going to work out. We're confident and positive, we're confident and optimistic. But there's also some possibility, we don't know what it is, that everything works well in Airflow and in Snowflake and in S3, but Workato for some reason has a problem. Maybe it's with the API or something else.
Sure, absolutely.
Workato does have a way to do error handling, and they've got some retry set up over there, but I'll let Daniel speak more to that because he's more.
I would imagine that would all be on the consuming side's problem. On
right.
If it got safely to S3, how you get it from there to wherever you need it is up to
That's
that
right.
leg of
like let's say someone
Excellent.
deleted the field in Salesforce, right? That would be the sort of thing I would imagine that would create this, but yeah.
Oh, there's about a billion things that can go wrong.
That's
all right,
right.
Excellent. So is there a thought here just while we're on, and then if we want to go on, snapshot versus the appending? Obviously, we have a live data set that's appending inside S3, meaning when we show up and ask it, we do the snapshotting, if you will, on our side, meaning that's when we pulled it here. The data set updates, that's when we pull it here. And so now the consuming system is now the only keeper of those slices, right? Because it's just one appending table up on S3, right?
Yeah, we'd have it both in S3 and in Workato, and then they would stay in there based on whatever retention policies we have in those systems. And I'd have to double check what those are, but yeah, that's correct.
Right. And so, but what I'm saying is, because I don't think Workato is Workato's gonna move the data. I don't think it's gonna store the data.
It will for a time. Daniel can speak to it better than I could.
Okay. Neat. Whatever that thing is that goes through there. Okay. But that's not going to be the new keeper of the snapshots. What I'm saying is that if we did it where S3 is constantly just, here's the most recent data set that you can get at, Mr. Consumer, consumer, awesome. Is that now if the consumers are using it in the snapshot model, not just like a live, oh, here's the data, but we need it for trending. A very important part of a lot of the stuff we're doing is we need to know that answer at a specific point of time. So therefore we need snaps. We need to do it in a snapshot model. But then starting there, it sounds like we're going to be the only people that have those snaps and actually need to keep them around, right? Not the intermediary.
It depends. Because of how agnostic. this is just up to take the data, take the data from here and send it at this interval. It's all it's doing, right? Yep. So in my opinion, if we had a more rigorous need for auditability and we wanted to do some sort of snapshots, I would actually prefer to handle that up in the model in Snowflake, right? So the idea would be, hey, maybe we do a snapshot model in the sense of we're always sending all the data that we have available today, but maybe we still send that on a timestamp. And what we have in that model is the actual full history, right? And then that would give us full auditability. So we would have the ability to do that based on the model we had there. But I'd want to keep, in my opinion, I want to keep that out of the orchestration and the data push here, the data pump. I'd rather have that in really easy to spot places like in the data model where we can use SQL and we can map that against what's data that we're finding in the target system.
Right. And I love that answer. My question currently in Snowflake, if someone asks, I need to know the number of licenses we had 10 days ago, how is that solved by the data team today?
Yeah, so there's two ways. There's the emergency way, and then the way that we knew about it, so we were supporting it, right?
Yep.
So Snowflake has
let's do the second one, the one that you knew was coming. How do you do that one?
We have, so Dbt, our transformation tool, has built-in capabilities of snapshotting the data. So we basically just point the snapshot feature at the model we want snapshotted, and then every time we run the job, it's hey, just keep copying and snapshotting and timestamping, and it does a valid
is that
to,
an appending
valid
table
from.
with just a timestamp on it? Is it just
it has two timestamps? It has a valid to valid from. So it's actually keeping track of when the last time I ran was, and then it'll give you that frame. So you've got two columns, and then between those is the validity of that.
Sure. I think you could do it with one date, but I like that they train car. That's nice.
Yeah, it's called a type 2 slowly changing dimension.
Love it. So, okay. That is a fantastic bit of discovery on how we would come up with snapshots, because like today, we are consuming there's no snapshotting to the table that Jim and I that we built forever ago. There's no
right.
I doubt you're snapshotting it, right? But we are snapshotting it by downloading it once a week.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. What do you do it yourself snapshot? Okay, cool.
And we could support that in a way that's backed
excellent.
Up. And
so let's factor that into going forward, because I love the idea of solving the model. Love it. Because there could be things where, hey, we see it differently, things changed, and what we don't want to do is become the keeper of what is effectively, this is licensed data that we have just moved over into Salesforce. If we're the only ones with the historical bit here, people go how'd you get this number? I'd be it's what was on the S3 bucket on that day.
That's right, yeah.
That's the best answer we got. which I'm not saying that's a terrible answer. You know, we're doing this to attempt to inform our end users, the sales folks, on how to best serve our customers. It's all for good. But the IT person in me, deep down, says like, okay, that there's a issue where we're now the keeper of data that we don't own, and we're the only one with a copy of it, and that's bad.
Yeah, we could avoid that.
Awesome,
easy.
Excellent, cool. I'm now, we talked about Workato, so I know how we do it in Apex, right? It's Java. Me and Jim are Java engineers. Spoiler alert to everyone who didn't know that. And so, you know, awesome. We could do just about anything we want. Workato is obviously a more on rails, I don't want to call it low code, but it could be called low code style thing. So I'd love to see like how you get around all the kind of the humps and hurdles Justin and I just talked about.
Yeah.
Like how does that handle for it? I know how like a MuleSoft would handle for it.
That's right.
Because I have experience with that. But Workato, how does that work?
Well, given that we're at time now, maybe it'd be worth having a separate meeting, and I'm happy to help or be involved with Daniel Parker. He and his team, he and Karuna went through and they set up a pretty smart retry framework for how they want to handle this in general in Workato. And obviously, like you're kind of pointing at, instead of building it ourselves, we sort of can rely on what's built in Workato and then also beat up them if it doesn't work. But so far, I think it's been working pretty well.
Beat up, technical term.
That's right.
All right, we are at time. We'll go in. And, Dan, do you want to stay on, and we could catch up? I haven't talked to Dan in a long time. Cool. All right, Justin, does this conclude the recording?
Yeah,
I think so.
Yep. And then just for everybody to, in the agenda, there's a link to the Epic if you want to see sort of what's left, right? So we want to add testing, monitoring, things like that. And some of that's being fleshed out still from a project management standpoint.